What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and this is part 2 of my favorite romantic relationships in video games. Alright, part 1 is already up on my channel, so I suggest you see that entry to see numbers 10 through 8. Then come back to this video to see the remaining entries. And there's a good chance it might have a part 3 on this list, so we'll see where this goes. Also, if you're wondering, I got a haircut because I'm going to have a job interview on Tuesday, so we'll see where that goes as well. Alright, without further ado, let's get back into it. Moving on next, at number 7, we have Kiryu and Kaoru Sayama from Yakuza 2 and Yakuza Kiwami 2. Oh boy. Honestly, when it comes down to it, the Yakuza franchise is one of the few that has some interesting pairings. And naturally, when it comes down to it, honestly, well, I was essentially considering Kazuma Kiryu and his friend Yuki from the original Yakuza game and its remake Yakuza Kiwami, a game I have on my Nintendo Switch that I have yet to play, but I hope to play it this year, considering I'm trying to clear my entire backlog of video games this year. So, fingers crossed on that. But the reason why I considered that was naturally because Haruka is seen as an adoptive daughter figure to Kiryu himself. However, that being said, honestly, there actually was one from the sequel game, Yakuza 2, and its remake, Yakuza Kiwami 2, in Kaoru Sayama, who, of course, is introduced as a member of the Osaka Prefectural Police, who is essentially placed in charge of Kiryu to protect him while he was investigating Osaka after, well, everything that has to do with everything involving the Goda clan, and of course the as well as the Millennium Tower attack. And naturally, there's obviously no love lost between her and the Yakuza, as more often than not, she tends to have a bit of a chip on her shoulder towards them. However, so basically their relationship, it starts off a little rocky. However, as the game goes on, they start to gain a bit more of a closer bond, especially when you consider after Sayama's shot, basically he ends up taking her to a nearby bar to essentially end up allowing her a chance to recuperate, and eventually they end up having some moments of closeness with each other, to the point where Sayama ends up catching some feelings for Kiryu. However, it turns out they're closer than you think, as basically Sayama's mother was originally a member of another crime of a Korean crime group known as the Gomi Jewel, who of course was essentially protected and spared by of course Kazama, who of course was the man who largely acted as Kiryu's mentor during when he started as a part of the Kazama family, which honestly, when you think about it, is kind of a nice little connection between the two of them. And it's even further when you consider that Sayama is basically the long lost, I guess I'd say, half sister of Ryuji Goda, who is basically Kiryu's rival during that entire game. So, really says a lot. And what's even more noticeable is that it goes even further with Yakuza Kiwami 3 in Yakuza 3, which even before the start of the game, we end up seeing Sayama get transferred to the United States, which honestly kind of puts the kibosh on any relationship. However, with Like a Dragon between the two of them, with Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, we may very well end up seeing a sort of resurgence of a couple of sparks between the two of them, even though they don't personally interact during the game. So, yeah. Honestly, kind of puts the fact that I was also considering Ichiban and Psycho for this list as well. Kind of funny to say the least. Moving on next, at number 6, we have Coraline and Leongar from Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Oh boy! Like Pokemon and Yakuza, if you remember when I mentioned before that Isaac and Jenna weren't the only canon married couple that was going to be on this list, well, this is another one. And like Pokemon and Yakuza, and GTA, there's not that many romantic relationships in Kirby. In fact, the previous one that could be considered as a romantic relationship just so happens to be in Kirby Triple Deluxe, with Taranza and the big bad of that game being Queen Sectonia. I mean, heck, Kirby Planet Robobot has kind of a serious familial relationship in Susie and the semi-big bad of that game in President Hultman, which in all fairness really does say a lot. However, Forgotten Land takes a different turn from all of them, basically being the first ever open world Kirby game in a beautiful setting, which basically implies it to be post-apocalyptic Earth, considering how it's implied that humans used to live in that area. But it introduces us to the characters of the Beast Pack, which includes the Gorilla Bruiser, Gorimondo, the Silly Dillo, the beautiful and lithe Coraline, and the powerful and imposing Leongar. Yeah. And honestly, in all fairness, even before the start of the game, the Beast Pack were kind of a found family in themselves. That being said, the big one just so happened to be Coraline and Leongar, who were originally a married couple known as Carol and Leon. And they were originally the leaders of what would eventually become the Beast Pack. In fact, even before all that, when Leon ended up coming across Fecto Forgo and got somewhat possessed by it, Carol decided to stick around, changing her identity to Coraline just so she could stay by her husband. And even after defeating Leongar and eventually defeating the blob version of Leon, and of course, Fecto Elphalus. Eventually, Cloveline's still worried about her hubby to the point that she basically tasked Kirby to go into an alternate version of the world or of the setting of the game in order to basically rescue him from Soul Forgo and, of course, Morpho Knight's grip, which honestly really does say a lot. And heck, she does eventually make an appearance after all that, basically revitalizing him as one of many other members of the Beast Pack, alongside the other members of the Beast Pack, to revitalize Leon by returning his soul to him, which is kind of one of the most heartwarming things I could ever see from a married couple. And honestly, I wish Michael DeSanta and his wife, Amanda, could essentially take some notes from. Yeah. I guess when it comes to married couples, those Nintendo does what Rockstar don't. Yeah. I apologize for that one. Moving on next at number 5, we have Locke and Celes from Final Fantasy VI. Oh boy, Final Fantasy! Yeah, there are a lot of romantic couples in this franchise that, honestly, it's very hard to choose a specific one it was hard to choose a specific one for this list, as you have so many of them. Cloud and Aerith from 7, Tidus and Yuna from 10, Noctis and Lunafreya from 15, Clive and Jill from 16, Squall and Renoa from 8. I mean, heck, even Zidane and Garnet from 9, and even Cecil and Rosa from 4. You're really kind of divided onto which one you like. However, I decided to choose basically the stalwart thief, excuse me, adventurer / treasure hunter, Locke Cole, and the former Magitech knight, Celes Share. And while I haven't played through the entirety of Final Fantasy VI, or at least Final Fantasy VI Advance, honestly, really says a lot once you realize how amazing their interactions are with each other. And especially how you basically see a bit of a kind of a connection and closeness between the two of them. Especially during the famous opera scene where Celes more or less volunteers to perform in an opera in order to draw out the gambler Setzer out of hiding, and eventually attracts the attention of Ultros, leading Locke to basically rescue her from Ultros' grip and basically act as her champion. And eventually, after Kefka ends up winning and destroying the continent, or basically destroying the world, it seems to the point that Celes seems like she's wants to end it all, only to essentially discover that through a bird that Locke is still alive, which gives her the will to basically gather every member of the party back together in order to basically defeat in order to basically defeat Kefka, with Locke being the last one. And this is especially considering Locke's past with Rachel, which more or less allows him to end up following his heart and ending up being with Celis. Really heartwarming. This will be continued in part 3.